Aaliyah, hi, how are you?
Hi Nico, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing good. We're here at our third and final session. Are you excited to get a little bit more into the career specifically today?
Yeah, I hope to get some more insight about my next steps after I finish this program, so I'm excited.
Okay, great. Let me just share my screen and we'll get right into it. Okay, so the first resource that we have is called Career One Stop, and this really gives you an overall description of what clinical and counseling psychologists do. And it's kind of nice because I know that you're interested in both. And since they're
Mhm.
relatively similar, they combine a lot of the data. So you can take a look and just read this real quick and see kind of what you think about it.
Okay.
So do you think that that's maybe something that you want to do, observe and interview individuals with mental illness so that you might make a diagnosis and also help them in their development and their adjustment?
Yeah, these are all things that I'm very interested in.
Okay. And I think it's cool too. Like, they're also known kind of by many different names. So I think that you're already on this path in general, being that you're in a counseling program and that you'll one day have your LPC most likely. So
Hmm.
that's kind of good that you're already, this is kind of considered an alternative form of being a psychologist, and you're already on that path. So that's good to know. And down here we have the projected employment, and with a 10% change here in the next year or so, that's pretty significant. I think on average it's like maybe 3 to 1% for
Hmm.
more common jobs. That kind of looks good. What do you think about the fact that there's going to be an increase in the job availability? Is that something that's attractive to you?
Yeah, that makes me feel more comfortable that I'm pretty likely to get a job in the field. So, yeah, that makes me feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it definitely represents a serious need. I think that also too, in this case, it's sad to know there's a need, but it's also important in terms of the job security to know that
Hmm.
there's a need. So it's good that you're helping people that definitely need it right now.
Yeah.
What about the typical wages here? I really like this graphic. It kind of shows that like 90% of people make less than this. So I think that when you take a look at it, if you go into kind of the middle here, you know that you're probably at least going to be in this range after
Hmm.
fully becoming a clinical or counseling psychologist. And with different type of credentials and experience, you could work your way up here. But I think it kind of shows graphically how many people make what amount. Is it kind of clear here that like, this like bottom 25th percentile, that's not really a lot of people. So if that salary looks a little bit less attractive, that's really just the bottom half of it. You're probably looking at least somewhere closer to the median.
Hmm.
And what do you think about that salary? Does that look desirable to you?
Yeah, that looks definitely like a livable wage for me. And it's kind of interesting to see like the opportunity to potentially make more, I assume, with like, a doctorate degree compared to my master's. So I kind of have room to, eventually make a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. I know even too, looking up jobs in Pittsburgh, for example, that I seen often a typical salary was around like 80 or $90,000. So it really does just depend where you are. And actually, kind of in the next resource, we'll get into that too. So location could
Okay.
potentially play a factor in that as well. And so people starting in this career usually do have a doctoral professional degree. So we've kind of talked about that a little bit. So you would be working towards a PhD or a PsyD. How do you feel about that? Do you think that when the time comes, that's a kind of commitment that you'd like to make?
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth it for me to eventually get that side D. I might potentially work in the field a little bit before doing that, but eventually I definitely want to get that degree.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. And really that experience, kind of like we talked about in terms of the salary, could really benefit you. So I think that that's a good idea either way. If you needed to work a little bit before making that decision, that you wouldn't be missing out on anything. You would still be building your resume essentially.
Hmm.
And then I thought this typical education was interesting because you see a lot of master's degrees when they say a percent of people working in this field. And I'm imagining that some amount of that is probably the fact that a long time ago, to be a psychologist, you could do that with just a master's degree. I do believe that there are probably some programs that enable you to practice clinical psychology to an extent. I don't think you wouldn't be a licensed psychologist, I don't believe nowadays at any standard without getting a PhD, but I'm thinking that that's why there's this bulk of the master's degrees there, and or they're counting other jobs. So I think that what I'm trying to say is I wouldn't put too much stock in the fact that a master's degree here is for this job. It's definitely the doctoral or the professional degree, which is still regardless an extremely high percentage.
Hmm.
And I mean,
Okay.
there aren't any psychologists with a bachelor's degree. So I don't know where that percentage is coming from. So I think the main thing to focus on is that there's definitely a bulk of people with a doctoral degree that are
Right.
psychologists. And then I think with the knowledge, right off the bat, I mean, you're spot on. So your bachelor's was in psych, and you have knowledge of human behavior and individual differences, psychological research methods, and then you have therapy and counseling. So procedures of diagnosis and treatment, that's kind of something that I think you'll get a lot more out of in your counseling education,
Hmm.
and principles and theories of counseling in general as well. And also it happens that you have customer and personal service experience. We kind of talked about in that
Yes.
in the beginning as if, is it relevant? Is it not? But it definitely is relevant. And that's even a part of the knowledge component here. So you have a lot of different things to your benefit. Would
Yeah,
you,
for sure.
how do you feel about taking a look at these activities real quick? What do you think? What do you think about these?
Um, so as far as counseling and diagnosing, that sounds stuff that I would want to do. Collecting information from people through observation, interviews, and surveys. I'm not as interested in the research side. I am willing to do that, but it's not my main focus, I would say. So that's why I think I'm more interested in going for like a PsyD than a
Hmm.
PhD.
Sure.
But yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's a very good consideration on your part, because clearly a PhD has a huge research component. It's usually a part of universities where they actually help you to pay for, or at least get funding. They're a domain where they usually get funding for research projects. So if you weren't really heading in research, the PsyD being considered somewhat more of like a clinically focused program might be a benefit. I would just advise to make sure of the accrediting body for that program. And I would also, if the data is available, I would try to see if the internships provided are also APA accredited. So
Okay.
that's my advice, because PsyD programs are newer and they're a very profit-based program, whereas like research, once again, you could kind of get that funded potentially. I think that you just need to make sure about the accrediting body. So
Okay.
that is my advice on that. And looking down here at the skills, overall, your personality, I think, really provided this active listening. Once again, maybe sometimes you aren't super quick to open up, but when you do, it's genuine. And I
Hmm.
think that's perfect for a psychology relationship, because even a psychologist going into that first therapy session, I mean, you're not going to completely self-disclose in the first interview. You kind of have natural healthy boundaries, but then when you do communicate, you actively listen. So this definitely seems like a career for you. And I would say the service orientation as well, looking for ways to help people. That's definitely something that you've talked about. and social perceptiveness, understanding people's reactions. I mean, I think that you care how people feel.
Hmm.
So do these
Yeah.
sound like skills that you think represent you?
Yeah, these are definitely qualities that I think I've mastered and will be able to do well when it comes to this field.
Okay. I think my last question here is really just this last slide and abilities and oral comprehension. I don't think we need to talk about that, but what about like written expression? You know, we talked a little bit about you wanting to write. I know there's going to be a lot of paperwork. So do you think that, and I
Mhm.
mean, even clinically, right? Like not even just research. So do you think that you're ready to really do all, write about treatment plans and diagnoses and things like that? Is that something that you're ready to put a lot of work in your writing?
I think I am a strong writer, so I think that I will do well in this. Um, I know I have, some work to put in, but I think, further throughout the program that I'll get there.
Okay, great. I'm glad that you feel like you can do that competently. I definitely think that that's going to be a part of your career. With that said, the
Mhm.
last thing I'd like to take a look at is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I think what this does is it just breaks down the information we've looked at in a different way, adds a few different points. The first thing here is just this mean hourly wage. So $42 an hour, does that sound pretty good to you? I know we've looked at the overall, but maybe, just comparing it in your mind to jobs you've worked in the past, does that seem like a enticing salary?
Yeah, putting it this way in terms of hourly wage kind of is more relatable for me in jobs that I've worked. So
Sure.
that does seem attractive in comparison to my previous jobs.
Okay, great. And another interesting feature of this page in particular is that you can see the industries that these different kinds of psychologists are employed in. Now, for the record, considering that this page did combine clinical counseling and school psychologists, you would probably have to dive deeper if you were looking into the school specifically. Sometimes psychologists are contracted and stuff too. So I don't think that exclusively a person would have to be a school psychologist, but that's just
Hmm.
something to keep in mind if you were interested in the school areas here. Do you have any ideas in terms of like a location where you'd want to work, like maybe a hospital or an agency? Is there somewhere that you prefer, do you know, if you were a counseling psychologist?
I feel like I'll probably start in an agency,
Okay.
but I'm really not sure yet what population I want to work with or in what setting. So that's something I'll still need to figure out.
Okay, well, there's definitely data here about outpatient care centers and offices of other health practitioners and offices of physicians. So I think that if you wanted to work for an agency, there's a wealth of data here about how populated those particular facilities really are. So this might
Hmm.
be a website to take a dive into, and then maybe you can start to look in particular areas. And the last thing on this page really are these different graphics that I encourage you to take a look at whenever you get the time. Right here, it kind of shows how much employment are in different states. And so I think it's kind of encouraging if you know that there's a lot of employment in one state, then you know that maybe you're likely to get a job there, especially considering the growth of the career, right? Like if a place was just densely employed and there was no growth, then it might be difficult to get a job. But with the increase in the need and the density, it kind of presumes that the clients are going to be there as well. And that's partly
Hmm.
a reason that there's so many people employed there. So that might be an idea to keep in mind as you go forward, but maybe also you're looking for a less dense place because you're trying to be more attractive and you think that it would be easier to stand out. So that could be something to keep in mind too. And also, I think another thing that it shows here is the annual mean wage based on state. So like, for example, here, I thought it was neat that PA doesn't necessarily make the highest amount, yet it's one of the denser in terms of employment. So I think that
Yeah.
as you go through these things, you can start to make decisions like, okay, well, maybe I wanted to go to PA to work. or stay in PA to work because it's has a lot of employment opportunities, but maybe I want to make even more money, which of course you would just also have to consider the cost of living, because yeah, maybe you could go to New York and make a little bit more, but also the cost of living's higher there. So
Hmm.
these are just the type of things you have to look at. Like, yes, these provide a lot of information, but they're also very context dependent on other factors.
Right.
So I'm going to stop my screen share now. And, you know, we've really talked about a lot. We learned, that you have a bachelor's in psych, that you're into a counseling program right now, and you're potentially going to go for counseling psychology in the future, most likely a PsyD. You are very, your main focus is to help other people. And despite being introverted, that kind of fuels your creativity that you might apply to your clients. And it seems like the job itself and all the activities that you're going to have to do are a perfect fit for who you are. So, what is there anything that you'd like to reflect on in terms of that brief summary? Is there anything else you'd like to add that maybe you took away from this counseling session?
I feel like this session kind of maybe made me more confident in my own abilities, and it just kind of made me feel comfortable in the fact that I am doing what I'm supposed to and I'm on the right path. Like my personality is very in line with the field that I'm going for. So it makes me feel a lot more prepared to go into the field.
That's great. I'm glad that it made you feel more confident. And I think that the more you engage with the field and the more you look into yourself, looking into both of those things more, I think that you're going to become more certain. So I'm glad that this was kind of like the first step to that journey.
Hmm.
So Aaliyah, with that said, I think that we're ready to end unless you have any other questions.
No, I think you about covered it.
Okay. Thank you so much. If you ever need me in the future, feel free to reach out.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bye.